a microphone on there. A microphone on a microphone.
Oh, that's your feed.
This is my audio because they've got no more feeds left. Of all things.
Yeah, I think they were having some like trying stuff out with it.
I'll make it really nice and tidy. Hi. Should be okay, he hopes. Well, he doesn't do boy band stuff. Electrical tape. So it needs to go the opposite way, but there you go. So that locks there.
Yeah, it just trips in the lectern, so you just need to keep it safe.
Is that okay?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. My name's Danny Sriskandarajah. I'm Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, and on behalf of trustees, my colleagues, NEF alumni, welcome to our 40th birthday party. It's an amazing moment in the proud history of this organisation to do a series of events and to launch it here in Wood Green with Zack Polanski. Welcome to the Wolves Lane Centre. For those of you who don't know it, have a look around. It is exactly the sort of place in a world that feels uncertain and difficult that you can find hope and inspiration. Because look around, and this is an attempt to rebuild and regenerate communities. It's about the environment. It's about a black-led organisation, building community wealth block by block, building by building. And we wanted to host the first of our birthday series somewhere outside the sort of Westminster bubble that we spend far too much time, and come to somewhere that's inspiring. And thank you to Yvonne and colleagues here for hosting us. It's also exactly the sort of place that I think the founders of NEF would have wanted us to be at. And I want to read a bit from the sort of letter that created NEF. And this was a letter to urge progressive economists, heterodox economists, ecologists and others in the mid-1980s to convene first a series of conferences, but then eventually to create an institution that would do a few things. And this is a paragraph from that letter that I think summarizes the sort of hope behind NEF for all these 40 years. To challenge the complacent orthodoxies of growth economics was once considered absurdly heretical. Not to do so now is positively antediluvian. The pursuit of contemporary industrial economics constitutes the greatest single threat to human rights today in this and every other country. As the gaps inevitably widen between North and South, between expectation and fulfillment, between finite resources and infinite demands, between economic necessity and fundamental ethical ideals of cooperation, solidarity, and common humanity, so the tendency towards repressive responses and quasi-totalitarian government is strengthened. And I read that, and it feels so prescient and feels so timely, because I think we are in a moment again of human history where being in hoc, if you will, to sort of orthodoxies, dangerous economic orthodoxies, is ravaging communities around the world. It's leaving people unhappy and insecure, and it's leading to the repressive politics that we're seeing around the world. And we want to mark our 40th anniversary by celebrating the work that NEF has done over these 4 decades, by celebrating the amazing people, many of whom are in the room, who helped build this fabulous organisation, celebrate the ideas and initiatives that NEF has been involved in or helped set off, from the Jubilee Debt Campaign to Ethical Trading Initiative to Time Banks UK, to the Happy Planet Index, to the 4-day working week, to the Earth Overshoot Day, all sorts of wonderful things that NEF has been involved in over the last 40 years, but also to celebrate the amazing things that the organisation is trying to do today to challenge those complacent orthodoxies. And that, in some ways, is all the good stuff that think tanks do. Just yesterday, our colleague Lydia was appearing before the Treasury Select Committee to challenge complacent orthodoxies around fiscal rules. Just last week, our colleague Jaya was writing about, Jaya is in the room somewhere, was writing about how if we ignore the impacts of climate change, all that stuff, all the sort of the fundamental assumptions of the economy around debt to GDP ratios just are blown out of the water unless we change the way that we work. We've got our colleague Grace, who's just joined us as the Kerslake Fellow in honour of our late chair, who's working with housing campaigners, renters' unions, to change the way that housing is provided in this country, to make it genuinely affordable and inclusive. We've got our colleague Domi, who's working with a whole range of black-led organizations to rebuild community power and community wealth, including through with Ubele here. And so it's wonderful to be part of an organization like this, a movement like the New Economy movement, trying to challenge those complacent orthodoxies. And it's a real pleasure to begin our year of events today. Later in the year, we're going to do all sorts of other events. Next week, we'll have Steve Reed, the Housing Secretary, launch the Kerslake Fellow and introduce Grace formally to the world. In a few months' time, we have Andy Burnham joining us for a lecture and event. We have Professor Jayanti Ghosh, the amazing, inspiring Indian economist, who will be joining us later in the year. And there's more to come to celebrate NEF and all it's trying to do and has done. But I'm really glad, Zack, that you've agreed to help us launch our birthday. Zack Polanski, for those of you who don't know him, has been a member of the London Assembly since 2021, has been Deputy Leader of the Green Party between 2022 and 25, and since September last year has been the leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. And you all know that the New Economics Foundation is a registered charity. And in this country, it's very clear that registered charities cannot have favourite political parties, let alone favourite politicians. So just to be clear, the New Economics Foundation does not have favourite political parties or politicians. But there are three reasons why we're really delighted you're here. That letter I quoted from, written in 1983 and led to the creation of the New Economics Foundation, was from Jonathan Porritt, who some of you may remember was the chair of the Ecology Party. The Ecology Party was the predecessor of the Green Party of England and Wales. And if it weren't for people like Jonathan and the members of the Ecology Party at that time reminding us that we needed to challenge those complacent orthodoxies, we wouldn't be here. So it feels very appropriate to have the leader of today's Green Party launch our birthday. Secondly, I've been knocking about in the sort of think tank policy world for over a quarter of a century now. And there are very few politicians that I've come across who can, as you have been, who can join the dots between the ridiculous ways in which we have chosen to organize our economy and the anger and frustration people do. And very few politicians who are able to not just connect the dots, but connect with people and their lived experience. And some of what you say could have been written by NEF. I mean, if you worked for NEF, you'd be a fantastic advocate for some of our ideas. Let me quote, for example, the threat to the places we love comes not from people arriving on small boats. It comes from an economic system that sucks money from people and places who need it. And it comes from a politics that tries to divide us and points the finger at each other rather than the billionaires. This is a nation of neighbours. And, it's things like that you say that we wholeheartedly support, because it's that sort of analysis and it's those sorts of solutions that this country and the world so desperately need. And finally, I'm really happy you're here, because we can't have favourite think tanks, but we love it when politicians have favourite think tanks. And that's our dream, is that you and others who want to challenge those complacent orthodoxies think NEF. Rachel, if you're watching, welcome. You'll be welcome back any time, or others. But without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Zack Polanski to deliver his keynote on the economy.
Thank you, Danny, and good morning. We live in rip-off Britain. Sky-high bills, stagnating wages, extreme inequality. It can't go on like this, but we have a plan to change it. We've had this speech in the works for a long time now to celebrate 40 years of the New Economics Foundation, but no one could have quite predicted the context in which I'd be speaking to you now. 18 days ago, the US and Israel launched an illegal bombing campaign in Iran. Already well over 1,000 civilians are dead, including 110 children, killed by a missile now widely believed from the USA. Despite the killing of the leader, the repressive Iranian regime remains in place, with many saying the new leader could be even more hardline than his father. This was not a war of self-defense. There was no imminent threat. Negotiations were ongoing. It was, as the BBC's international editor said, a war of choice. People across the Middle East are terrified of what Trump and Netanyahu's war will mean for them and their loved ones. And the repercussions are echoing across the world as instability spreads and oil prices spike. Here in the UK, we watch in despair as those B-52 bombers take off from our soil and as our economy reels from the shockwaves of this war. Struggling families are seeing price rises coming towards them like a freight train hurtling down the tracks while they're stuck, helpless, and unable to see a way out. Meanwhile, some are profiting off this misery and bloodshed. Oil company shares have soared to all-time highs, but here in the UK, it is ordinary people who are paying the price. People who are already struggling so hard just to make ends meet. People feel like they're running every day just to stay in the exact same place. The idea that yet again, for the second time in just a few years, that we are going to have to deal with another enormous spike in the cost of basics is utterly unacceptable. It's unacceptable because we didn't need to be there. It's unforgivable that just 4 years after we last saw an energy price shock, that one triggered by Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, far too little has been done to protect our country, our people, our economy from the impact of yet another energy price shock. We could have seen a nationwide program of home insulation, going door to door, making sure every home can keep in the heat, so no one would risk getting sick or dying because they can't afford heating in the winter. My colleague in Westminster, Ellie Chowns, she has been pushing hard for the government to go further and faster on insulation. Because right now, even if the government fulfill their plans, and it's a big if, there will still be 4.6 million households in the UK living in poorly insulated homes at the end of this Parliament. Damp and mouldy homes for no reason at all. There's so much this government should be doing to protect people in the future, not least doubling down on renewable energy, so we're no longer so vulnerable to these shocks. Instead, we could be ready to stand firm in the face of them. Last week, a report by the Climate Change Committee found that decarbonising our economy by 2050 would cost less than it costs to deal with a single oil price shock. But time and time again, governments have chosen to pay for each crisis as it comes, always playing catch-up, never getting onto the front foot. We should be grasping the nettle, dealing with the root cause, giving us security and strength in an unstable world. I also recognise talking about the future won't reassure people who want to know if they're going to be able to afford their bills tomorrow. The many people checking the news every single day, wondering what it means for us, constantly doing the maths in our heads if we'll be able to afford the next energy bill that lands on our mats. That's why the government should guarantee right now it will not allow energy bills to rise beyond the April-June price cap. Instead, setting aside approximately £8.4 billion to prevent a rise of up to £300 per household that could be coming down the track. No, it's not cheap. But the alternative? It's unacceptable. If the price cap raises, interest rates rise, mortgage rates up, bond yields up, inflation up. We will be back into the doom loop that has done untold damage to our economy and caused misery for households across the UK for years now. And there are ways to pay. Instead of scrapping the windfall tax on energy companies as this government is planning to do, we should be strengthening it instead. We need a real loophole-free windfall tax with no exemptions for reinvesting in fossil fuels. A robust tax that claws back every single pound of reckless profiteering from this crisis and repurposes it immediately to protect every home in the country. And while taxing extreme wealth in the ways we need to, it will take time to implement. There are levers the government could pull right now, like equalising capital gains tax in line with income tax and reforming the base to raise £12 billion. It is time for the government to act decisively, eliminate the uncertainty that is plaguing people and the markets, and insulate us from some of the worst economic effects of Trump's war. But while dealing with the crisis in front of us, we also need to ask ourselves why. Why our economy and the people who keep it running keep being so vulnerable to global shocks like this, much more so than other major economies, like Spain, which doubled its wind and solar capacities since 2019, which took it from having some of the highest energy bills in Europe to now the lowest. Other countries have been able to learn the lessons from previous crises and prepare. Why is our response so weak when disaster strikes? The answer, put simply, is because we live in rip-off Britain, an economy built to reward the few off the work of the many, a country where people work so hard and try to do the right thing, but still struggle to afford the basics, and people find themselves constantly cutting back. Today, I want to share my plan with you for how we end rip-off Britain, how to make life affordable for people in this country, and rebuild our economy so we can weather the storms of this unpredictable world. But first, to understand how we got here and what has happened to our country, to people here, to our jobs, our housing, our wages, I'd like to take you back to when I was born. So, it's the 80s. It's all leg warmers and Wham. You get me? I was born in the winter of '82 in Salford. And as a teenager, I lived right next door to a huge McVitie's factory, which actually happens to be next to a little-known constituency called Gorton and Denton. I still remember waking up to the smell of chocolate in the mornings wafting down the street. But look, it wasn't perfect, but we had everything we needed, and we still had a sense of hope that working hard could get you places. But I was born into a changing Britain. The month I was born, Salford docks shut down. 3,000 dock workers losing their jobs. By that time, 400,000 council homes had already been sold off under right to buy. And as I was growing up, Thatcher. She was selling off the state's vital assets one by one. British Gas in '86, water in '89. When I talk to young people about this, they don't believe it. We used to own these things, and we sold them off. And we know the impact of those changes. By the time the Tories left office, over £60 billion worth of precious state assets had been sold. A bonfire sale of our water, our energy, our railways, and so many other fundamental public services meant UK public wealth went from the highest in the G7 to the lowest, just over those 2 decades. And the consequences of this rigged economy are still with us today, biting at our heels as we try to make ends meet. Let's begin with water. Since the water sell-off, bills have increased by 44% in real terms, while the industry has accrued £72 billion of debt. And as customers, we carry the burden of that debt. A third of our soaring water bills goes towards paying dividends and servicing that debt, while the companies taking that money flush sewage into our rivers and seas seemingly at will. This sewage crisis is not just about dirty water. It's about the collapse of river ecosystems, the insects, the fish, the birds that depend on them, and the farmers, fishers, and communities that depend on those in turn. Nature is not separate from our economy. It's the foundation of it. And right now, we are letting it be destroyed. And for what? The shareholder returns. We will fix this, ending the scandal of shareholder profit and bringing water back into public hands so every penny we make and pay goes into making the service better. And let's return to housing. Over 2 million houses have now been sold under right to buy since it was introduced. Now look, in the first place, those houses went to people who had worked hard and saved up to own the home they lived and loved. But now they're increasingly owned by private landlords, property developers, investment firms who treat our homes and their tenants as cash cows. 1 in 6 private renters is now renting a former council home, often at extortionate rates and often partly paid for by the government in the form of housing benefit. Another example of a system which is not only totally unfair, but utterly incoherent. Our Green MP, Sian Berry, she has been fighting hard to end this mess, calling for councils to be able to buy back homes lost through right to buy. So we need to end right to buy completely, build more council homes and control rents so everyone can afford a decent roof over their heads. In other words, the very basics. The things we rely on to build the foundations of a good life. They have been taken out of our hands, sold for profit, and then sold or rented back to us at crushing rates. The water that keeps us alive, the energy that warms us, the homes that keep us safe. We used to save for a deposit, a summer holiday, or even just put a little bit away for the future. But so many of us are working right now just to cover the increasing costs of getting through every single day. Working just to survive. It does not have to be this way. We can rebalance the scales so that our hard-earned money is ours again. So we can choose to save it for a weekend away, to pick up a gift for mum on the way to see her, or put something away for the kids when they need it. But to do that, we need to make a wholesale change to how our economy works. Because the damage did not end with Thatcherism. Instead, that damage was turbocharged by austerity after the crisis of 2008. It was cloaked in misleading analogies about maxed out credit cards, household budgets. Austerity was not a solution to the crisis, but a project which used the crisis. It was an opportunity for them to facilitate an enormous upward transfer of wealth from the many to the few. Public spending eviscerated. Look at local government, for example. When accounting for population growth, spending power fell 27.5% in real terms between 2010 and 2020. In real words, that's our libraries, our parks, the public services we all rely on. The average working age adult in Blackpool, for example, lost nearly £1,000 a year under austerity. The power of workers to organise for better pay and conditions has been crushed, and it's allowed big corporations to make greater profits by squeezing the wages of their workers. And this sustained project of privatisation and deregulation, it has turned Britain from a place which made things people need to a place which made money for people who own things. Because while ordinary people have paid the price day after day, something else has been happening right out of sight. The wealth of those who own those precious assets, the ones sold out from us under Thatcher and then sold back to us for profit, their wealth, it has skyrocketed. In 1990, I was going through primary school. There were 15 billionaires in the UK. By last year, that number had risen to 154. And let's look at how those people are making their money. Today, more than 1 in 4 billionaires draw some or all of their wealth from property and inheritance. That is money being made, not by putting anything into the economy, like running a business, creating a job, or making a product, but simply from sitting on assets or charging somebody else for the use of them. It is clear that we have too long. Now look, other politicians may shy away from talking about compassion, but it's what we need to bring back into our societies. It's literally been privatized. We only need to look at the scandal of privately owned children's homes. A report by the Competition and Markets Authority was unequivocal. It said, the largest private providers of placements are making higher profits than we would expect if this market were functioning effectively. If ever there was a sign of a sick economy, one which lacked care, which had been stripped of compassion, this is it. This is vulnerable children's lives, and people are putting their profit margins first. That is disgusting, and we need a government that cares again. But while successive governments have embraced the economics of managed decline and actively corroded many of the things we hold dear, the human spirit is such. Compassion and care will always remain. And it's our job as politicians to harness that potential. Because sadly, wherever you look across our country right now, that spirit of compassion, of care, of public service, it's in danger of being eroded by an economy that is grinding all of us down. And when we're struggling to put food on the table and running just to stand still, the ties that bind us, they are at risk of fraying. Because the picture for people living in the UK right now is bleak. Wages, all but stagnated since 2008. Unemployment, that's on the rise too. And the number of young people out of work is at an 11-year high. Growth literally ground to a halt, by the way, in spite of this government insisting that they're pursuing a policy of growth at all costs. AI, which in many ways has the potential to be a force for good, but it's already causing people to lose their jobs, consuming huge amounts of energy and water. Planned data centres will produce little employment, blight communities, and it will obviously jeopardise further our climate targets. Our communities are facing increasing threats from wildfires and flooding, with all the damage that does, not just to the economy, but to people's lives. I'm incredibly proud of the work our MP Adrian Ramsey has been doing to put climate resilience at the top of the government's agenda right now, because communities are being let down by this government's failure to take decisive action to protect them. And then there's Brexit. The evidence of the impacts are so clear. Employment, down. Investment, down. Productivity, down. The economy is 6 to 8% smaller than it would have been. Hundreds of pounds added to the average household shopping bill. Leaving the EU has been a sledgehammer to an already weak economy. It's a grave time. It's filled with fear and anxiety. But it's also filled with a growing sense that we need to do things differently. And that sense was abundantly clear just a few weeks ago when Hannah Spencer won the Gorton and Denton by-election. Yes. I have never seen anything like the enthusiasm I felt in those streets, going door to door with Hannah, meeting people who were so excited to vote to make her the new MP. Hope up, energy up, readiness to change the country up. And since Hannah stepped through the doors of the Houses of Parliament just a couple of weeks ago, we've seen the difference a Green MP makes. Just on her second day as an MP, she created an all-party parliamentary group to tackle fuel poverty. And in her first week, she was already fighting for better transport links for her constituents. Because it's not just hope we're bringing. It's hope and a plan. We will end rip-off Britain, make life affordable for people in this country, and rebuild our economy so that it's resilient and strong. And today, I want to talk to you about the three central planks of our plan: tackling the cost of living crisis and bringing down inflation, overhauling our tax system so the super rich pay their fair share, and modernising fiscal policy so it's fit to tackle the challenges of today. And when it comes to the cost of living, let's go back to rent. Spiralling rents are ripping the heart out of communities across the UK. Renters are being forced to cut back on essentials just to afford the cost of a roof over their heads. And it's not just individuals who suffer, it's the entire economy. So it's time to do things differently. We know rent controls can work, and we can learn so much from the different models that have been tried elsewhere. Rent controls are an established part of private renting in 16 European countries, and it could not be clearer. The UK's got some catching up to do. If we had frozen rents in autumn 2022, households in Britain would be saving over £3,300 per year on average. That's £3,300 per year on average. Across Britain, that would put £18 billion of purchasing power back in the pockets of ordinary people. Money that could be spent on local businesses, buying a coffee on the way to work, or a few pints at the end of a hard week. Instead, straight into landlords' pockets, leaving our high streets hollowed out. And our brilliant Green MP, Carla Denyer, has been raising the alarm on this scandal, pushing for rent controls to be included in the Renters' Rights Bill. But this Labour government, they just wouldn't listen. We need to bring in rent controls. We would stop the chokehold of rip-off rents and breathe life back into our communities. Second, let's stop paying the privatisation penalty, lining the pockets of shareholders. And we can start with the water companies. Nearly a third of the typical water bill in England goes to funding shareholder returns and debt servicing, compared to only around 10% for publicly owned Scottish Water. That's shocking. Hundreds of pounds every year that people work hard to earn, going straight into the coffers of shareholders. Let's end private ownership of water, bring down bills, and make our water system fit for purpose. And third, we need to cut energy bills. We need to massively scale up our investment in clean energy infrastructure to secure our energy independence and increase our resilience as a country. And in the shorter term, we need to stop the price of gas inflating the price of electricity, ending the possibility for gas plants to charge high prices when gas-fired electricity is needed to make up an energy shortfall. And of course, it's always important to point out, what's the cheapest bill? Well, it's the one you don't have to pay at all. We need to insulate people's homes and reduce energy need. With these three measures, rent controls, bringing water into public hands, and cutting energy bills, we start to end rip-off Britain. But we also know, to change the game, we need to be clear about who is paying and what rules we're following. So I briefly want to talk about tax and who we're going to tax and why. Look, we know a wealth tax won't fix everything, and no one has ever pretended it would, but it would be a very good place to start. Implementing a 1% tax on wealth over £10 million and 2% on £1 billion would raise around £15 billion per year. And it would send a very clear message that those who have accumulated the most money will pay a little bit more. Get that money flowing through the economy. Make sure it is benefiting everyone. For a truly progressive government, a wealth tax needs to be a day one priority. And to get our economy moving, we need to look again at all of the levers we have to pull. That must include equalising capital gains tax in line with income tax, close down avoidance loopholes, and expand national insurance to cover income from investments as well as earned income. No one's saying economic policy is easy, nor that we need to make all the changes overnight. But let's face it, the framework right now is not working, nor is even the way we talk about our economy. Decades of fiscal tightening, often to meet fiscal rules, have meant stretched services and people suffering. That doesn't just harm the people who need the services now, but it strangles our economy. Because when we're sick, when our bus service is cut, when our parents are getting older and aren't getting the help they need, we're all less productive. It doesn't have to be like this. Firstly, we've got to stop equating the government's finances with a household. This false equivalence has been a poison in British politics for far too long. Hospitals, schools, transport starved of investment, and that costs us every single day in money, in time, and in stress. And secondly, we need to exit the bond market doom loop. Our fiscal framework is hypersensitive to market movements. And this creates policy uncertainty that then fuels the very market jitters it was there to supposedly prevent. And you don't just have to take my word for it. Even the IFS, the supposed custodians of fiscal responsibility, are saying the framework is dysfunctional. And thirdly, UK fiscal forecasting currently relies on rigid fiscal multiplier assumptions that constrain effective government policy. By assuming spending multipliers expire after just 5 years, the current model is prioritising short-term fiscal targets over the longer-term economic and social gains that targeted spending could achieve. Right now, we can't even plan major infrastructure projects. We can't invest properly in a healthy, educated population. Right now, we can't build our future. The sum of all of this is that successive governments have hemmed themselves in with an economics that denies people the services they require and support they rely on, often to placate a set of arbitrary rules. It is ridiculous. We need to think again. More up-to-date multiplier assumptions could create greater fiscal space and allow a serious step up in government investment and in government vision. The government should change these failing fiscal rules and opt instead for fiscal referees. This is a panel of experts tasked with judging debt sustainability, which includes not only making sure the government isn't spending too much, but also ensuring they're not spending too little. This is closer to the model used in Australia and New Zealand. And after almost 16 years, we need to look again at the OBR. It was born of promises to eliminate the deficit and take urgent action to reduce debt. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's clearly failed. Proposals such as transforming the OBR into the Office for Fiscal Transparency are just one of the suggestions the New Economics Foundation are making, and are definitely worth examining. Any politician who claims to have all the answers to the problems we're facing right now is frankly lying to you. The world is increasingly unstable. We've got a rogue US president. We've got climate breakdown, which is increasingly unstable, and an uncertain Europe with our place in it looking increasingly uncertain. What we do know is that things have to change. We will end Rip-Off Britain, pay people properly for their hard work, and give people a real plan for a better country. And we have to do this because we know the other parties won't. They have too much baggage, too many vested interests. From Labour, we just get managed decline. And a Reform Party. A Reform Party desperate to be seen as on the side, apparently, of working people. But we've seen their policies, backing a dangerous US president, feeding fossil fuel funders' addiction. They're wavering on NHS privatisation. They oppose workers' rights. It is clear that Nigel Farage would in fact rip open the unhealed wounds of a failing economic system. And that is before I even mention that reform would have dragged us into this illegal and deeply unpopular war. People are seeing every single day who reform really are. And that's where the Green Party come in. No longer can we be said to be on the fringes or dismissed as not able to win seats. No, we are breaking through every single barrier that is put in front of us. It's funny, people ask me about defections all the time, and when I say people, I mean journalists. But you know what? I'm frankly a lot more interested right now in winning more elections, because our membership is at a record high. We have a record number of councillors, and many of you might noticed we've got a new MP. As I said, this speech is just the beginning. We will be setting out our plans in more detail as we approach the general election. But at the centre of everything, there will always be three very simple questions. How do we make life more affordable for everyone? How do we back the caring majority over the wealthy elite? And how do we protect our planet for generations to come? We have a plan to end rip-off Britain, to make a country we can all afford to live in, to end the privatisation penalty, protect us from energy spikes, and look after those who need care. We know this country can be a better place to live, and our plan is how we make hope normal again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe the mics, yep, they're working. Thank you, Zack. That was. I mean, it's extraordinary to think, as Danny said, that you only really recently became the leader, and to have delivered a lecture in which you have such clarity about what you see as the future and such clarity of what's going wrong in our country. So thank you for showing that. We have got a lot of questions from Rex, but I'm going to sneak one in before we get there, because I was interested that you referred to, in your kind of how do we deal with this potentially significant energy price shock. You referred to freezing the price cap, and I just wondered, is this not the moment in which we move to a kind of permanent price break, where government takes responsibility to start to guarantee a kind of discounted or free block of energy for an essential amount for every household? Is this the moment to do that?
Yeah, I think there's two major things going on in the speech. I'm talking about more holistically our plans for the economy, particularly to deal with energy and energy independence and security. And then there's what do we need to do right now to deal with the shock that we're all experiencing. And targeted is a conversation we need to have. But it's also important to say that it's not just poor people right now who are going to face the energy crisis. It's pretty much all of us, other than a few very wealthy elite. We're all going to have that experience of getting energy bills through the door where we're just a little bit more worried, or start to be more worried than we might have been just a few months ago. We need to also make sure that through a fair taxation system, though, we're bringing that money back in by taxing the wealthiest. So I think targeted spending is something we should have a discussion about, but it's going to require a much more specific model as opposed to kind of the emergency measures we need to take right now. And that's why I'm calling on the government to, after June, make sure that cap keeps in place, because it could be between £100 to £300 that energy bills are going up, and that's just unacceptable. We need to make sure that people can heat their homes and that they have the energy they need.
Thank you. I think we've got a couple of broadcast journalists here, so I'll go to those first, and then I'm going to go to press who've requested to have a question. So I think we've got the BBC first, yeah.
There's a mic coming to you.
I apologise 13 years ago when I did that article with The Sun, and I apologise again. And I think people largely see that we're more than one mistake. In fact, one of my favourite politicians, Tony Benn, died 12 years ago this week, and he said, "I don't care where you're coming from, I care where you're going." And so I think it's important when you make a mistake to own up to it, and I absolutely do that, and I apologise for that. I've apologised several times, and I think most people are interested in how I'm going to lower bills. So to come to your second question, it's really important to recognise people are worried right now about their energy bills, and they're right to be worried. And that's not just the wealthiest, that's frankly everyone who's going to face an energy bill dropping down on their mat. And so targeted interventions are conversations we should have, but they're not things we could bring in immediately. And right now, people are already struggling without the risk of their bills going up. So I'm calling on the government today to intervene and make sure after June, people's energy bills do not rise. If that's going to wealthy people as well, then also let's make sure we have fair taxation, like our wealth taxes, and bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax, to make sure that we're holistically dealing with this. But the number one priority has to make sure that people can afford their energy bills today and tomorrow.
Thanks. Lewis Dennison, ITV.
So if I begin with unemployment. Unemployment is at a record high. In fact, the last time it was this high was during the COVID pandemic. And that's, for context, how much of a risk this is and something we need to deal with. Everything I've just talked about in my speech is about productivity and investment, making sure we're investing in the future jobs of tomorrow, in fact, the future jobs of today, making sure that those jobs are being created. And that's a way of getting young people working, making sure that there's investment both to deal with some of the crises we're facing in our communities, but also jobs that we could be creating for young people. The most obvious example that I referenced in my speech is insulating people's homes. We have some of the leakiest homes in Europe in terms of energy efficiency. If we insulated every home in Britain that needs it, that could create hundreds of thousands of good green jobs that could be in the public sector, where people could be unionised, so they're organised for power and conditions at work, they're treated properly with dignity and care, and they're paid a proper wage. It would also reduce emissions, vital in a climate crisis, and it would reduce bills, vital in the cost of living crisis. So that's a triple win. I also think more widely, we need to make sure that young people are at the table. I'm sick of hearing politicians say, "Oh, I'm so inspired by young people." Well, actually help them to be at the table so they can co-design policy, co-produce, to make sure that they're designing the future that they want. I think young people far too often get used tokenistically rather than actually being at the table, having their hands on the levers of power as well, so they're making choices. Then on drugs, first thing to say is I think the Prime Minister, his comments were disgusting. Drug deaths have increased every single year in this country for the last 13 years. We have the highest drug death rate in Europe. So the very least I would expect from a Prime Minister or any serious politician when they're talking about drugs is to recognise that we have a public health crisis, and that should be spoken about with dignity, with sensitivity and with care. What we got from the Prime Minister is cheap political attacks to try and win the Gorton and Denton by-election. And he'll probably have noticed we still won with a 4,000 majority. So those political attacks don't work. But much more seriously, they debase the conversation we need to have about harm reduction and about speaking to public health professionals to make sure they're involved in that conversation. In terms of legalising cannabis, there was a report out this week, I think, that it's one of the things that the civil service suggested to Rachel Reeves rather than cutting winter fuel payments. The fact that she wouldn't even entertain that conversation and was more content to allow pensioners to really, really suffer and to face the adverse risk